In this video, we're going to explore the chilling true story of an American sailor who lost his rudder after a violent collision with a whale in the open sea, an accident that led to fatal consequences. But this isn't just a tale of tragedy. It's a wake-up call to every sailor navigating the deep blue. We'll break down exactly what went wrong, the critical mistakes made, and, most importantly, the essential safety measures that might have changed the outcome. From rudder protection strategies to emergency steering setups, we'll reveal what every sailor should know before casting off into the unknown. This story is more than just a cautionary tale. It's a chance to learn, to prepare, and to honor those lost by making sure their lessons aren't forgotten. We'll dive into expert advice, gear recommendations, and the harsh realities of offshore sailing that too many ignore until it's too late. So stay with us as we relive the final hours of this fateful journey, extract life-saving lessons from it, and remind ourselves why preparation is the true lifeline at sea. And tell us, would you be ready if your rudder failed hundreds of miles from shore? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because what you learn here might just save your life. Ethan Carter was 45, an engineer from San Diego with salt in his veins and a dream in his heart. He'd spent years tinkering with boats, teaching himself celestial navigation and sketching routes across dog-eared charts. His goal was simple but audacious: to sail around the world solo aboard his Catalina 42 Wanderlust. The Catalina 42, built by Catalina Yachts, a stalwart American brand since 1969, was no luxury yacht. At 42 feet long with a 13-foot 10-inch beam, it was a workhorse, designed for stability and comfort on long passages. Its fiberglass hull, fin keel, and spade rudder made it nimble yet sturdy, powered by a 40-horsepower diesel engine and a rig carrying a 155% Genoa and a full batten mainsail. Ethan had outfitted Wanderlust with 400 watts of solar panels, a 100-gallon water tank, and a basic wind vane for self-steering. It was a boat built for adventure, not opulence, perfect for a man chasing the horizon. Ethan's journey began in San Diego, a natural starting point for a westward circumnavigation. The plan was to follow the trade winds, a route favored by solo sailors for its predictable breezes and warm waters. From San Diego, he'd hug the Baja California coast, stopping in Cabo San Lucas for provisions before striking out for the Galapagos Islands, 900 nautical miles southwest. From there, he'd face the longest leg, a 3,000 nautical mile crossing to the Marquesas Islands in French Polynesia, a passage that could take 20 to 30 days. The route would then weave through the South Pacific, Fiji, Tonga, New Zealand, before tackling the Indian Ocean, rounding the Cape of Good Hope, and eventually looping back to the Atlantic. It was a classic circumnavigation, one charted by legends like Joshua Slocum and modern cruisers alike. But it wasn't without risks. The Pacific alone held vast stretches of empty ocean, where help was weeks away, and the sea could turn unforgiving in an instant. Ethan prepared meticulously, or so he thought. He'd inspected the rigging, serviced the engine, and stocked Wanderlust with 60 days of provisions: canned goods, rice, dehydrated meals, and 20 gallons of emergency water. His safety gear included a life raft, a handheld VHF radio, and an EPIRB, an emergency position indicating radio beacon, though he hadn't checked its battery in months. He carried a basic emergency rudder, a lightweight aluminum frame meant to slot into the transom, but he'd never tested it in rough seas. His navigation relied on a chart plotter, paper charts, and a sextant for backup, a nod to his love for traditional seamanship. He'd read about rudder failures and whale collisions, incidents like the 2023 sinking of Rain Dancer after hitting a whale. But he figured the odds were low. After all, he'd sailed the California coast for years without issue. What could go wrong on the open sea? The first leg was a dream. Ethan left San Diego on a crisp October morning, the sun glinting off the Pacific as Wanderlust sliced through gentle swells at 6 knots. He spent 2 weeks coastal cruising, anchoring in Ensenada and Cabo San Lucas, where he topped off fuel and shared beers with other cruisers at marina bars. The vibe was electric. Stories of far-flung islands, near misses with storms, and the camaraderie of those who live by the wind. Ethan felt alive, his dream unfolding with every mile. From Cabo, he set sail for the Galapagos, a 10-day passage across open water. The trade winds held steady at 15 knots, and Wanderlust performed flawlessly, her autopilot humming as Ethan cooked meals on a gimbaled stove and scribbled in his logbook. He spotted dolphins off the bow, their arcs glowing under a full moon, and felt the pull of something bigger than himself. This was why he'd left his desk job, why he'd sold his car and rented out his house. The sea was his home now. In the Galapagos, Ethan anchored off San Cristobal, marveling at sea lions and blue-footed boobies. He spent a week exploring, restocking fresh fruit, mangoes, bananas, papayas, and checking Wanderlust's systems. The rudder showed no signs of wear, its stainless steel shaft gleaming under inspection. He greased the bearings, tightened the quadrant cables, and called it good. The next leg loomed large, the Pacific crossing to the Marquesas, 3,000 nautical miles of blue desert. Ethan knew it would test him. He'd read about sailors battling fatigue, equipment failures, and the psychological toll of weeks without land. But he was ready, or so he believed. On November 10th, he cast off, pointing Wanderlust's bow toward Nuku Hiva, the trade winds filling her sails. For the first week, the crossing was textbook. Ethan settled into a rhythm, sail checks at dawn, noon log entries, and evenings under a canopy of stars. He averaged 120 nautical miles a day, the wind vane keeping Wanderlust on course as he read paperbacks and cooked one-pot meals. The sea was a living thing, its swells rising and falling like breaths, and Ethan felt in tune with it. He'd check the rudder daily, peering over the transom to ensure the blade was intact, and run the engine for an hour to charge the batteries. His solar panels kept up with the fridge and electronics, and the water tanks were still 3/4 full. Life was good, the dream intact. On the 10th day, 1,200 nautical miles from the Marquesas, everything changed. It was mid-afternoon, the sky a brilliant blue with 15-knot winds pushing Wanderlust at 6.5 knots. Ethan was below, plotting his position on a chart, when a sickening thud shook the boat. The hull shuddered, dishes crashed in the galley, and Ethan was thrown against the nav station. He scrambled topside, heart pounding, to find Wanderlust slewing off course, her bow yawing wildly. The autopilot was screaming, unable to compensate. He grabbed the wheel, but it spun uselessly in his hands. Something was wrong with the rudder. Ethan cut the autopilot and dove to the transom, peering into the water. The rudder blade was mangled, half of it sheared off. The stainless steel shaft bent at a grotesque angle. A slick of blood and blubber trailed in the wake, evidence of a collision with a whale. Humpbacks were common in these waters, migrating across the Pacific, and their 40-ton bulk could devastate a fiberglass boat. Ethan's stomach churned. He was 1,200 miles from land, alone, with a boat that couldn't steer. He tried to stay calm, running through his options. The emergency rudder was his first thought, but it was designed for light conditions, not the 6-foot swells now rocking Wanderlust. He'd need to act fast. He furled the Genoa and dropped the mainsail to slow the boat, reducing strain on the damaged rudder. The sea was still manageable, but a low-pressure system was forecast to bring 25-knot winds and 10-foot waves within 48 hours. Ethan retrieved the emergency rudder from the lazarette, a flimsy aluminum frame with a plywood blade. He bolted it to the transom, cursing its lightweight design. In calm waters, it might have worked, but the Pacific was no marina. He tried steering, but the emergency rudder flexed under the load, barely holding course. Wanderlust wallowed, her bow drifting with the swells. Ethan's next move was to improvise. He'd read about sailors using drogues or warps to steer without a rudder, dragging lines off the stern to create drag. He rummaged through his gear, finding a spare spinnaker pole and 100 feet of dock line. He lashed the pole to the transom, trailing lines to form a makeshift steering system. It was a long shot, but he had to try. For hours, he tweaked the setup, adjusting the lines and testing the boat's response. It worked, barely. Wanderlust held a vague course at 2 knots, but the effort was exhausting and the system was fragile. A snapped line or a tangled pole could end it. As night fell, Ethan's situation worsened. The wind picked up to 20 knots, and the swells grew to 8 feet. Wanderlust pitched violently, the makeshift rudder struggling to keep her stern to the waves. Ethan was soaked, his hands raw from hauling lines, his body aching from being thrown against the cockpit. He hadn't slept in 24 hours, and the mental strain was crushing. He thought of his sister in San Diego, his niece's laugh, the life he'd left behind. Why hadn't he installed a hydrovane, the self-steering system favored by blue water sailors? Why hadn't he taken that offshore safety course? Regret was a bitter companion. He tried the VHF radio, broadcasting a mayday on Channel 16, but no one answered. At 1,200 miles from land, he was beyond VHF range. The EPIRB was his last hope, but when he checked it, the battery indicator blinked red. Low power. He hadn't tested it before leaving the Galapagos, a rookie mistake. He activated it anyway, praying the signal would reach a satellite. With no way to confirm, he was left with hope and a sinking feeling. The sea didn't care about his dreams or his mistakes. It just kept moving. By the second day, the weather deteriorated. The low-pressure system arrived, bringing 30-knot winds and 12-foot waves. Wanderlust was battered, her hull groaning under the strain. Ethan's makeshift rudder failed when the spinnaker pole snapped, leaving him with no steering. He tried trailing warps, long loops of rope, to stabilize the boat, but they tangled in the prop. He considered lying a hull, letting Wanderlust drift beam on to the waves, but that risked a capsize. His only option was to adjust the sails, using the Genoa to pull the bow downwind, a technique called jury steering. It was slow and imprecise, but it kept him moving toward the Marquesas. Exhaustion set in. Ethan hadn't eaten properly, surviving on granola bars and sips of water. His hands were blistered, his body bruised from being tossed around. Sleep came in 20-minute catnaps, each interrupted by a rogue wave or sail adjustment. The psychological toll was brutal. Alone with no one to share the burden, Ethan's mind wandered to dark places. He saw his father's face, heard his mother's voice. He wondered if he'd die out here, another sailor swallowed by the Pacific. The thought was paralyzing, but he pushed it down. He had to keep fighting. On the third day, a gale hit. Winds screamed at 35 knots, and waves towered at 15 feet. Wanderlust was out of control, her bow swinging wildly as Ethan struggled with the sails. He was hypothermic, his foul weather gear soaked through. The life raft was an option, but deploying it in these conditions was suicide. He stayed with the boat, clipping his harness to the jacklines and praying Wanderlust would hold together. At some point, he blacked out, overwhelmed by fatigue and cold. When he came to, the boat was still afloat, but the situation was dire. The cabin was a mess, with gear strewn across the floor and water sloshed in the bilge from a leaking hatch. Ethan's final hours are a mystery. Wanderlust was found 6 weeks later, drifting 800 miles east of the Marquesas. Her sails shredded, her cabin flooded. There was no sign of Ethan, no body, no life raft, no note. The EPIRB was still active, its weak signal picked up by a passing freighter, but it was too late. Investigators pieced together a grim picture. Ethan likely succumbed to hypothermia, dehydration, or a capsize that threw him overboard. The damaged rudder, the failed emergency systems, and the lack of reliable communication sealed his fate. Wanderlust, once a symbol of freedom, was a ghost ship, a stark reminder of the sea's indifference. What went wrong? Let's break it down. First, the rudder failure. The Catalina 42's spade rudder, while efficient, is vulnerable to impacts. Whale collisions, like the one that sank Rain Dancer in 2023, are rare but devastating. Ethan's rudder wasn't reinforced with a protective skeg or bronze shoe, a modification recommended by naval architect John Smith. Regular inspections might have caught wear in the bearings or shaft, but Ethan relied on a quick visual check. A more thorough haul-out with ultrasonic testing of the shaft could have revealed weaknesses. The lesson? Don't skimp on rudder maintenance. Check bearings, grease fittings, and torque bolts every 6 months. If you're blue water sailing, consider a skeg or a spare rudder system like the hydrovane, which doubles as an emergency steerer. Second, the emergency rudder was inadequate. Ethan's lightweight model was meant for coastal cruising, not a 3,000-mile passage. In 6-foot swells, it buckled under the load. Jane Doe, a veteran circumnavigator, suggests testing emergency systems in rough conditions before departure. A robust drogue or sea anchor could have stabilized Wanderlust, letting Ethan ride out the storm. Products like the Jordan Series drogue, with its 116 cones, can reduce capsize risk in 40-knot winds. Ethan didn't carry one, a costly oversight. The takeaway? Invest in a heavy-duty emergency rudder or a drogue and practice deploying them. Time spent drilling in a marina can save your life at sea. Third, communication failed. Ethan's EPIRB was near dead, a cardinal sin for a solo sailor. EPIRBs, like the ACR Global Fix 54, cost $400 but can pinpoint your location within 100 meters. A charged unit might have brought rescue within 24 hours. His VHF was useless beyond 20 miles, and he lacked a satellite phone or an Iridium GO, which saved the Rain Dancer crew. The lesson here is non-negotiable. Carry multiple communication devices, test them monthly, and keep batteries charged. A $500 sat phone could be the difference between life and death. Finally, Ethan wasn't prepared for the mental and physical toll. Solo sailing demands endurance, but he underestimated the impact of sleep deprivation and stress. Offshore safety courses, like those offered by the U.S. Sailing Association, teach techniques for managing fatigue, such as 20-minute power naps and calorie-dense meal plans. Ethan's ad hoc diet of granola bars left him weak. A proper stores list, high-protein meals, electrolytes, and a water maker could have kept him sharp. The psychological strain, too, was underestimated. Solo sailors like Robin Lee Graham used routines like journaling or music to stay grounded. Ethan had no such system, leaving him vulnerable to despair. What can we learn? Preparation is everything. Start with your boat. Inspect critical systems, rudder, rigging, hull, before every major passage. Use checklists, like those from the World Cruising Club, to catch oversights. Reinforce vulnerable components, like spade rudders, with skegs or sacrificial shoes. Carry a spare rudder system, tested in rough seas, and a drogue for storm conditions. Invest in communication gear, an EPIRB, a sat phone, and a handheld VHF with DSC. Test them regularly and carry spare batteries. Stock 20% more provisions than you think you'll need, including 1 gallon of water per person per day and high-calorie meals. Train yourself. Take an offshore safety course to learn jury rigging, storm tactics, and fatigue management. Practice steering without a rudder, using sails or warps in controlled conditions. Build mental resilience with routines, meditation, logs, or even a playlist to combat isolation. Join forums like cruisersforum.com to learn from others' mistakes, like the 2019 rudder failure of SV Serenity, which drifted 1,500 miles before rescue. Share your float plan with family, including waypoints and check-in times, so someone knows if you're overdue. Gear matters. Here's a starter list. An ACR Global Fix V4 EPIRB, 400, an Iridium GO sat phone, 600, a Jordan Series drogue, 300, and a Scanmar SOS rudder, 2,500. Add a water maker like the Catadine Power Survivor 40E, $3,000 for unlimited fresh water. A survival kit, signal flares, a PLB, and 10 days of food and water costs $200 but buys time. These aren't luxuries, they're lifelines. Compare that to the $50,000 cost of a new Catalina 42. Safety gear is cheap insurance. Ethan's story is a tragedy, but it's also a call to action. Every sailor, from weekend cruisers to live aboards, faces risks. The sea doesn't discriminate, it tests everyone. Ethan wasn't a fool. He was a dreamer who cut corners, like too many of us do. His mistakes, skipping maintenance, underestimating gear, ignoring training, cost him everything. But his loss can save others. When you're 1,200 miles from land, with a broken rudder and a storm on the horizon, preparation is your only ally. Ask yourself, is your boat ready? Are you? As Wanderlust drifted, a silent monument to Ethan's dream, it carried a message. Respect the sea or pay the price. Let's honor Ethan by learning from him. Check your rudder, test your EPIRB, practice your drills. Share this story with your crew, your dock neighbors, your sailing club. Let's build a community that sails smarter, safer, and stronger. In the comments, tell us, what's your go-to safety gear? Have you ever faced a failure at sea? Your story could save someone else. The Pacific is vast, beautiful, and brutal. It gave Ethan the adventure of a lifetime and took it away. Don't let it take yours. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Stay safe out there. Fair winds.